Good afternoon, and I want to welcome all of you to week 6 of our class together, Gen 425, Excellence and Innovation. As I mentioned in my message, I wanted to make a recording, talk about some of the key themes and topics. I had a scheduling conflict, apologize in advance for that, but I did want to make sure to provide a little bit of additional resource besides simply the slides, and we can have some discussion. If you have any questions this week, certainly feel free to reach out to me, email me, text me, and we will work through this week, and we will carry on and be back together with Collaborate and or online for our week number 7. So for this week, everyone will make discussion board posts between October 5th and October 11th. Please make a minimum of 3 posts and spread those out at least across multiple days, if not 3 days, at least across 2 days. It does help enrich the conversation and allow you the opportunity to engage with your classmates. So as we look at the content for this week and we look at the various things going on, one of the themes that came up and one of the themes that was discussed is who ultimately decides your job security, right? And that final verdict is in. And I think sometimes, especially business leaders, when they're making decisions for their businesses, they maybe somewhat fall into somewhat of a sense of they decide, right? Do employees decide? Do managers, business executives, or is it customers? And I think some of the maybe scary thing or the unsettling thing is as employees and as managers and leaders of an organization, we don't really control a lot, right? The final verdict comes from our customers. And it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. So if we think about innovation and what our customers want and where our customers may gravitate to or where they find value in innovation and certainly some of those disruptive innovations, right? It's ultimately our customers, right? Our customers decide, right, whether we get to stay in business, whether we get to continue practicing our craft or our art, whatever that is. It doesn't matter if it's a traditional paying customer, maybe like in retail, like at a Quick Trip or at a Kroger grocery store or a festival, right? Doesn't matter if it's higher education and it's students. Students are customers, right? What happens when our students fire us and don't find any value in the education we're providing them, right? That's a real dilemma for those of us in higher ed, right? Or even if you're in the healthcare industry and your patients, if your patients stop coming, they don't like the quality of care they're getting, they don't like the type of care they're getting, maybe they don't have a good interaction, right? Maybe that pre-doctor's office visit of how they schedule and interact and engage with your medical facility, that has to be robust, or perhaps they'll go somewhere else, right? So if it's patients, students, clients, traditional customers, they're all customers, right? And they make that final decision, right? It's our job, right, to do it better, right? When we're working in an industry and in a business, it's our job to do it better. And when we do it better, and when we connect with our customers, whatever our customers or whatever we call them in whatever industry, when we connect with them on that, they decide when we connect with them on that deeper level, they decide that we get to get bigger or that we get to continue being successful. So Christensen talked a little bit about resource dependence, right? And this ties into the dependence on our customers, right? Customers and or investors, right? So our, resource dependence says that our freedom of action is limited, right, to satisfying the needs of those entities that give us the resources, right? So we need to serve the needs of our investors and our customers because they provide the resources, especially in a for-profit world, right? But even in a nonprofit world, if you think about donors and philanthropists, right? People who are running nonprofits, they need the support of donors, right? They also need participants. They need people to be participating in their programs and services. So they still have that element to consider, right? And organizations of all sorts, for-profit, not-for-profit, educational, faith-based, right, community-based, they create products and services that fulfill the needs of their customers and the overall investors, whether the investors are in something for-profit or the investors are philanthropists, right, which might be involved for other reasons. So Christensen talked about a little bit that resource dependence is controversial, but the really controversial part is saying that, well, business leaders sometimes maybe don't control as much of the decision making as we think, right? And it's comforting, right? It's comforting for me to think the CEO of my company, right, is controlling these external factors, right? He or she are making decisions and they're controlling the factors, but maybe they're really not, right? And the question that I ask is, in reality, right, are some business leaders and the strategic decision makers in your organization, are they simply just gauging the market and the economic climate and then responding accordingly, right? How much is their direction, is their marketing, is their business strategic decisions influencing customers? And how much are customers, right, and what they're choosing to do really just influencing the decisions that business leaders make? That's kind of an interesting question. It's probably some of both. It's not an either or. And we've talked right about some of those either or falsehoods, decisions. It's not one or the other. It's probably both, right? And at times it's probably more one way or the other, but it's good to understand, right, that both are playing a role in having an impact. So we had some great stories of examples of what's the best way to go about this, right? So when we're implementing disruptive technologies, right, Christensen has laid out that it's probably best to spin off a subsidiary or put it in a team or a department of your current organization, especially if you're an industry leader, that is not subject to all the expense and revenue expectations and the market size expectations of your traditional company, right? So sometimes you can maybe go out and acquire a company and embed that disruptive innovation there. Perhaps you spin off a small subsidiary, right, that has its own structure about revenue and expense and creating value. Because otherwise, as we've learned, right, if a disruptive innovation comes into an existing organization and it's subject to all the decision making about resource allocation, about expense, revenue, market size, sales, profit, if a disruptive innovation gets exposed to all those things, all those forces within an organization, a traditional organization, it's probably not going to stand much of a chance, right? Because the disruptive innovation, the value lies somewhere else outside of the current value network of an organization. So you talked about Quantum and Quantum Plus, Control Data, right? They formed separate entities. They had a degree of success, right? Micropolis, they actually had some success, but it was 18 months of battle, 18 months of fighting all that inertia, fighting all that structure and decision making and that kind of the forces to just do more with our current customers and not look at disruptive innovation. So he said there certainly is a trend and a theme that if you can spin it off as some sort of separate entity, either within your organization or subsidiary, it tends to be more successful. Talked about retailing and some of the experiences there, right? And we heard about Corvettes, which doesn't exist anymore. Interesting, they spelled it with a K, right? But they decided, they wanted to, they introduced this concept of discount retailers, right? So not a traditional department store, but discount retailers that had the same profits as traditional department stores, but they achieved that through lower margins but higher inventory turns. So the kind of disruption here in the retailing industry wasn't necessarily a new product, but it was how you ran and structured your company, right? So Corvettes and some of the other discount retailers that have come along, they're all about volume and velocity, right? They get the same profits, but they just sell more at lower return and they turn that inventory quicker, right? And that's become a very popular strategy in retailing, even in fashion, like Zara's. That's how they turn that inventory of fashion like every 90 days, and the time to design a new fashion and get it on a shop floor, they minimize that time frame much more, and they've been very successful with it. So as we look at the retailing industry today, right, Dayton Hudson, which was a very traditional department store in Minneapolis, we know them today as Target. Target is the face of that store. It's no longer Dayton Hudson Dry Goods, it's Target, right? The German company or Crusade that owned Kmart, right? And it became Kmart and Sears, right? They did the discount retailing. Now, if we look at, Sears, JCPenney, Kmart, Montgomery Ward, Woolworths, which at one time was Woolco, they no longer are part of the landscape, right? And of course, Kmart and Sears merged together. And when we talk business strategy of mergers and acquisitions, mergers tend to be failures. They're still used as a strategy, and we might ask why, but the majority of mergers are failures. When it comes to profit margins, synergy, growing market share, making a stronger organization out of two under one roof, just doesn't work really well. And really, Kmart and Sears is an example of how it hasn't gone well, right? So a lot of you are probably familiar with Kmart and Sears, and if you think back, right, Kmart was maybe good at some clothing items. They had their blue light specials. Sears was good at appliances. They were good at their Craftsman tools. And when Kmart and Sears merged under one roof, under one company, It was kind of interesting because they ran two parallel companies. They never became one distinct brand as a merged Kmart and Sears, right? You didn't see Craftsman tools in a Kmart, and you didn't see some of maybe Kmart's clothing lines in Sears, which Sears had struggled for a long time with clothing. They ran two parallel companies, and they had locations right next to each other, a Kmart and a Sears, right? And they didn't decide to like close one location and just have a combined Kmart Sears. So really, they failed to make the tough decisions. They failed to realize what the market needed. They failed to create a distinct brand. And actually, the Kmart and Sears merger in the MBA strategy class has been a case study in the book many times. It just didn't work really well. And we've seen some of the failures, right? Sears, JCPenney, Montgomery Ward, Woolworths. They didn't adapt, and they didn't change their strategies. And of course, most of those are now no longer with us. Hewlett-Packard. We saw Hewlett-Packard chose a different path as some of the other companies and retailers, right? So laser printers, we're all fairly familiar with laser printers, right? They were at one time, they've come down somewhat in price, but they're still more expensive relative to the inkjets. Laser jets are relatively expensive, but they're also very high quality, right? Inkjet printers, right, have been less expensive than laser jets, but there's a little bit less quality. But for a lot of people, the inkjet printers were good enough, right? For the majority of people printing at home, if you have an inkjet printer and you've got, especially one over the last couple of years, and you've got one with some decent photo paper, you can print some really nice stuff. Or some document paper, you can print some really nice stuff. Now, volume might be an issue, right? But, people want 2 or 3 or 10 documents or 5 copies of a picture on 5x7 paper. An inkjet printer is very good, right? But for people who maybe want volume and high quality, well, then you go with a laser jet, right? But Hewlett-Packard did not decide on either or. They didn't say either we're going to do laser jet or we're going to do inkjet. They said we're going to do both. And then we're going to right size the organization, right? The volume of sales is an inkjet. We're going to sell a lot more inkjet. There's a lot of people who are happy with the quality of inkjet. They will take it, right? And they will purchase it. And they're willing to sacrifice a little bit of quality and not be able to print maybe 500 of something. They're okay with that for the less expensive inkjet. And then for the people who want the laser jet, right? They're going to make sure that they're out there, right? They're going to charge for it, high quality, expensive, more expensive to create a laser jet printer, right? And they're just going to right size and not produce as many. They'll produce fewer of those, right? Reminds me a lot of the digital camera industry, right? A lot of us use our smartphones today, right? We use our smartphones for taking our pictures. But there are still people that want, right, the Canon and the Nikon digital cameras that have the long lenses on and can take high speed or low light pictures, right? Really high quality that you can blow up and you don't see any sort of pixelation in the image, right? There are people that want that, but that's a small number of them, right? That's the laser jet side of that industry, right? The other digital cameras, well, that's all in either phones or lower end digital cameras that you don't pay as much for, right? But great example of avoiding the either or, right? We need to do both. We just need to right size our production and our capacity for what customers are going to demand. I mentioned in my typed announcement that I sent out to everybody, in the discussion board and in the announcement that I sent out, I put a link to a video by Seth Godin. It's several years old, but it's excellent. It details some of the key strategic choices and things we need to think about, especially as we're thinking about innovation, as we're thinking towards the future. He talks about the music industry, the newspaper industry, several other examples within that video. I encourage you to watch that video this week. In addition to the discussion I'm having here with you, watch that video to help fill in some of the strategic decision-making thoughts, the strategic decision-making strategies, and think at how it ties into innovation, think at how it ties into the future, and potentially how it ties into the innovation that we're really focusing on this class, disruptive innovation. I want to thank you for taking a few minutes of time to listen to my reflections on some of our content this week. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Next week, for this week, make sure you make 3 discussion board posts between October 5th and October 11th. And then next week on October 12th, we will have a full range of options. We'll have the Collaborate and the traditional discussion board available. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, if you have questions this week, reach out via email, text, or a phone call. Happy to have a conversation. Thank you for watching the video.